Hi, I'm Annette Dubrouillet, and welcome back. Today we're going to continue reading The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And today we're going to read Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a little bit long, so what I think we might do is we might divide it into two parts. Chapter 4 Part A today, and Chapter 4 Part B tomorrow. Chapter 4 is entitled Martha. When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire and was kneeling on the hearth rug, raking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments and then began to look about the room. She had never seen a room at all like it, and though it was curious and gloomy. The walls were covered with tapestry, with a forest scene embroidered on it. There were fantastically dressed people under the trees, and in the distance there was a glimpse of the turrets of a castle. There were hunters and horses and dogs and ladies. Mary felt as if she were in the forest with them. Out of a deep window she could see a great climbing stretch of land, which seemed to have no trees on it, and to look rather like an endless, dull, purplish sea. "What is that?" she said, pointing out the window. Martha, the young housemaid, who had just risen to her feet, looked and pointed also. "That there," she said. "Yes, that's the moor," she said with a good-natured grin. "Doth thou like it?" "No," answered Mary. "I hate it." "That's because thou not used to it," Martha said, going back to her hearth. "Thou think it too big a bear now, but thou will like it." "Do you?" inquired Mary. "Aye, that I do," answered Martha, cheerfully polishing away at the grate. "I'll just love it. It's none bare. It's covered with growing things as smelled sweet. It's fair lovely in the spring and summer, when the gorse and broom and heather's in flower. It smells of honey, and there's such a lot of fresh air, and the sky looks so high, and the bees and the skylarks make such a nice humming noise. And singing, I wouldn't live away from the moor for anything." Mary listened to her with a grave, puzzled expression. The native servants she had been used to in India were not at least like this. They were servile and did not presume to talk to their masters as if they were equals. They made salams and called them the protector of the poor, and names of that sort. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. It was not the custom to say, "Please," and "Thank you," and Mary had always slapped her ayah in the face when she was angry. She wondered a little what this girl would do if one were to slap her in the face. She was a round, rosy, good-natured looking creature, but she had a very sturdy way, which made Mistress Mary wonder if she might not even slap back, if the person who had slapped her was only a little girl. "You are a strange servant," she said from her pillows, rather haughtily. Martha sat on her knees and on her heels and with the black brush in her hand, and laughed without seeming at least bit out of temper. "Hey, I know that," she said. "If there was a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I should never have ever had been the under housemaid. I might have been a scullery maid, but I'd never have been let upstairs. I'm too common in that, and I talk too much Yorkshire. But this is a funny house, for all it's grand. Seems like there's neither master nor mistress except Mr. Pitcher and Miss Medlock. And Mr. Craven, he won't be troubled about anything when he's here, and he's nearly always away. Mrs. Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me I could never have done if Misselthwaite had been like other big houses." "Are you going to be my servant?" asked Mary, still in her imperious little Indian way. Martha began to rub the grate again. "I'm Mrs. Medlock's servant," she said stoutly, "and she's Mr. Craven's. And I'm to do housemaid work up here and wait on you a little bit, but you won't need much waiting on." "Who's to dress me?" demanded Mary. Martha sat up on her heels again and stared. She spoke in a broad Yorkshire in her amazement. "Can't thou dress herself?" she said. What do you mean? I don't understand your language, said Mary. I forgot, said Martha. Mrs. Medlock said I ought to be careful or we wouldn't know what I was saying. I mean, can't you put on your own clothes? No, answered Mary quite indignantly. I never did in my life. My ayah dressed me, of course. Well, said Martha, evidently not in the least aware that she was impudent, it's time that should learn. That cannot begin younger. It'll do thee good to wait on thyself a bit. My mother always said she couldn't see why grandpeople's children didn't turn out to be fair fools, what with the nursing and being washed and dressed and took out to walk as if they were puppies. It is different in India, said Mistress Mary disdainfully. She could scarcely stand this. But Martha was not crushed at all. I oughtn't say it's different, she said almost sympathetically. I dare say it's because there's such a lot of black folks there instead of respectable white people. When I heard you were coming from India, I thought you was black too. Mary sat up in bed, furious. What? She said. What? You thought I was a native, you daughter of a pig? Martha stared and looked hot. Hey, who you calling names? She said. You needn't be so vexed. That's out the way for a young lady at Ork. I've got nothing against blacks. When you read about 'em in trucks, they's always very religious. You always read as a black man's and a brother. I never seen a black, and I was very pleased to think I was going to see one close. When I come up to light your fire this morning, I crept up to your bed and pulled back a cover, take a careful look at you, and there you was. No more blacker than me, disappointed, for all you're very white. Well, maybe a bit yeller. Mary did not even try to control her rage and humiliation. You thought I was a native? You dared? You don't know anything about natives. They are not people. They're servants who must salaam to you. You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything. She was in such a rage and felt so helpless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she suddenly felt horribly lonely and far away from everything she understood and which understood her, that she threw herself face downward on the pillows and burst into passionate sobbing. So sobbed unrestrainedly that good-natured Yorkshire Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and bent over her. You mustn't cry like that, she begged. You mustn't for sure. I didn't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything. Just like you said, I beg your pardon, miss. Don't stop crying. There was something comforting and really friendly in her queer Yorkshire speech and sturdy way. She had a good effect on Mary. She gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. It's time for thee to get up now, she said. Mrs. Medlock said I was to carry that breakfast and tea and a dinner into the room next to this. It's been made into a nursery for thee. I'll help thee on with our clothes if thou get out of bed. If the buttons are on the back and thou cannot button them thyself. When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes Martha took from the wardrobe were not the ones she had worn when she arrived the night before with Mrs. Medlock. Those are not mine, she said. Mine are black. She looked at the thick white wool coat and dress over and added with cool approval, those are nicer than mine. Those are the ones that must put on, Martha said. Mr. Craven or Mrs. Ledlock to get 'em from London. He said he wouldn't have a child dressed in black wandering around like a lost soul, he said. It makes the place sadder than it is. Put color on her. Mother said she knew what that meant. Mother always knows what a body means. She doesn't hold with black herself. I hate black things, Mary said. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little sisters and brothers, but she'd never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. Why doesn't that put on thy shoes? She said when Mary quietly held out her foot. My ayah did it for me, answered Mary, staring. It was the custom. She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do a thing their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they gazed at one mildly and said, "It is not the custom." And one knew that it was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings, and picking up things that she let fall. If Martha had been a very well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair and button boots and pick up things and lay them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic who had been brought up in a moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves and on the younger ones, who were either babes in arms or just learning to toddle about and tumble over things. If Mary Lennox had been a child who was ready to be amused, she would have perhaps laughed at Martha's readiness to talk, but Mary listened to her coldly and wondered at her freedom of manner. At first she was not at all interested, but gradually, as the girl rattled on in her good-tempered, homely way, Mary began to notice what she was saying. You should see 'em all," she said. "There's 'twas, and my father only gets 16 shillin' a week. I can tell you my mother's put it to good to get porridge for 'em all. They tumble about on moor and play there all day, and mother says the air full of the moor fattens 'em. She says she believes they eat the grass same as the wild ponies do. Dickon, he's 12 years old, and he's got a young pony he calls his own." "Where did he get it?" asked Mary. "He found it on moor with its mother when it was a little one. He began to make friends and give it bits of bread and pluck long grass for it. And it got to like him, sort of follows him about and lets him get on his back. Dickon's a kind lad, as animals likes him." Mary had never possessed an animal pet of her own. She had always thought she should like one. So she began to feel a slight interest in Dickon. And as she had never been interested in anyone but herself before, it was a dawning of a new, healthy sentiment. When she went into the room which had been made into a nursery for her, she found that it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with gloomy pictures on the walls and heavy oak chairs. A table in the center was set with a very good, substantial breakfast, but she had always had a very small appetite, and she looked with something more than indifference at the plate Martha set before her. "I don't want it," she said. "I don't want that porridge?" exclaimed Martha incredulously. "No." "That doesn't know how good it is. Put a bit of treacle on it or a bit of sugar." "I don't want it," repeated Mary. Said Martha. "I can't be so good it'll go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes." "Why?" said Mary coldly. "Why?" echoed Martha. "Because they scarce ever had their stomachs filled in their lives. They're as hungry as young hawks and foxes." "I don't know what it means to be hungry," said Mary with the indifference of ignorance. Martha looked indignant. "Well, it would do thee good to try it. I can see that plain enough," she said outspokenly. "I've no patience with folks that sits up and just stares at good bread and meat. My word, don't I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em had what's here under their pinafores." "Well, why don't you take it to them?" suggested Mary. "It isn't mine," answered Martha stoutly. "And this ain't my day out. I get my day out once a month, same as the rest. And I go home and clean up for mother and give her a day's rest." Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast with some marmalade. "You wrap up on and go out and play," said Martha. "It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat." Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry. Out? Why should I go out on a day like this? Well, if thou didn't go out, thou have to stay in. And what has that got to do? Mary glanced about her. There was nothing to do. When Mrs. Medlock had prepared the nursery, she had not thought of amusement. Perhaps it would be better to go and see what the gardens were like. Who will go with me? She inquired. Martha stared. You go by yourself, she answered. You have to learn to play like other children what doesn't have sisters or brothers. Or Dickon goes off at the moor by himself and plays for hours. That's how he made friends with our pony. He got sheep on the moor that knows him, and birds that comes and eats out of his hand. However, there's little to eat. He always saves a bit of bread to coax his pets. It was really this mention of Dickon which made Mary decide to go out, though she was not aware of it. There would be birds outside, though there would be no ponies or sheep. There would be different birds from India, and it might amuse her to look at them. Martha found her coat and hat for her and a pair of stout little boots, and she showed her way downstairs. If that goes around that way, they'll come out into the garden, she said, pointing to a gate in the wall of the shrubbery. There's lots of flowers in summertime. Ain't nothing blooming now. She seemed to hesitate a second before adding, one of the gardens is locked up. No one's been in for 10 years. Why? Asked Mary in spite of herself. Here was another locked door added to the 100 in the strange house. Mr. Irvin shut it up when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried a key. Oh, there's Mrs. Medlock ringing a bell. I must run. Now that's the end of part 1 of chapter 4 of The Secret Garden. And we'll read the B part, or part 2 of chapter 4 tomorrow. Bye.